This is T3 Raider Facts, and welcome to the T3 Raider Roots podcast, episode 9. Even before the start of the 1965 season got off the ground, tension between the NFL and AFL was already out of this world, literally. When the Mercury spaceflight happened, and astronaut Frank Borman sent his transmission to the world, his message was very poignant. He urged Texas All-Star linebacker Tommy Nobis to sign with the AFL's Houston Oilers, the team to which he was a season ticket holder for. Nobis ended up signing with the newest NFL entry, the Atlanta Falcons, but the war was on. In Oakland, Al Davis viewed this as a war that he would win on his own terms, no matter the cost. The Davis regime got a tremendous boost with his draft in 1965, which was held on the same day as the NFL's draft. It reaffirmed the team's ability to pry elite college football talent away from the older, more established, and somewhat stodgy NFL. Al's number one selection was Memphis State tackle Harry Shue, a mobile 265-pound lineman who was just what the Raiders needed up front on the offensive line. Davis sent Scotty Sterling, his public relations man, to Memphis to sign Shue to a pro contract. Scotty checked into the Benbow Inn at the old Memphis airport, invited Shue to his room, opened a briefcase, and laid out $5,000 in $50 bills on the bed. Shue called up his wife and said, "You can't believe what this guy just put on the bed." "It's all yours," said Sterling, and had the college star gather up all this bonus money. Shue was wearing a Memphis State letter jacket, and the money was falling out of his pockets literally as he was leaving the room. But he was signed right there on the spot. Sterling told him, "Don't spend any money." So what did Harry Shue do? He went out and bought a brand new TV set. Great times. Shue's coach at Memphis State, Spook Murphy, had been in the secret employ of the Raiders organization. His team was playing Wake Forest that weekend, and when the game was over, the Raiders flew Shue and his wife and their little baby to Las Vegas. They gave Shue some money to gamble with. Ron Wolf, the main scout, and Sterling were sitting in the hotel casino lounge when all of a sudden, Shue came over and said, "This guy gave me his card." On the card was printed Hamp Pool, Los Angeles Rams. The Rams were looking to select Shue in the opening NFL draft as well. The Rams coach said, "Harry, give me a call. I'm in the hotel." Despite the Raiders' brilliant attempts to get Shue away from the rival league, the Rams had located him anyway. Sterling called Al Davis back in Oakland. Davis instructed Sterling to page Shue on the hotel's house phone, knowing that the Rams coach would pick up the page and would thus be diverted from the player. Davis told Sterling and Wolf, "Get the kid and his family out of there." So they arranged for the player's wife and child to go to the airport and pick up tickets to Los Angeles. The Rams representative staked out at the airport and joined the Shue family for the flight to Los Angeles. Meanwhile, the Raiders sent Harry Shue all by himself to Honolulu, Hawaii. Later, he was joined by the rest of his family, along with the Raiders' babysitter. The Rams never found him, and he was subsequently signed as the new starting tackle for the Raiders. It was this type of spy versus spy, move, counter-move espionage that had become the way of negotiating between the rival leagues over college talent. It was simply the contest of that period and the context of that period. Signing the Raiders' number 2 choice in that draft, wide receiver Fred Biletnikoff was just as wild an episode, only under different circumstances. This time, Davis himself was directly involved. Biletnikoff was just finishing a stellar collegiate career at Florida State. He had good size, terrific instincts, and was a superb athlete. Davis viewed him as the perfect complement to the long threat of Art Powell and their vertical passing attack. Davis had total access because the player's coach, Bill Peterson, was a good friend of Al Davis's. When Davis was directed to a local pool hall in Tallahassee, he talked the young receiver into a verbal commitment to sign with the Raiders. Nothing was official, though, because Biletnikoff still had one game left to play, the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, where the Seminoles were to take on Oklahoma. The Detroit Lions of the NFL had also drafted Biletnikoff, and they were working with Fred's parents back in Erie, Pennsylvania. The Lions flew the parents, along with their own general manager, to the Gator Bowl game. Charlie Sumner, Oakland's defensive coach, went with Sterling to Jacksonville to make sure the Detroit people were not able to get their hands on the player. The Raiders rented 5 rooms in the team hotel, 1 each for Charlie and Scotty, and 3 for Fred, shifting him from one room to another every night so the Lions couldn't find him. Detroit was never able to get to him. Meanwhile, Davis flew into Jacksonville and looked up a local attorney to bear witness to Davis's plan to sign the receiver right after the game concluded. Biletnikoff had a great afternoon, catching 4 touchdown passes, and Davis was waiting for him on the field when the clock ran out. When he saw Biletnikoff's mother and the Lions representative on the opposite sideline, Davis convinced the local police guarding the field not to allow them on the field. Davis met Biletnikoff at midfield after the final whistle with the lawyer present and gave the player the contract to sign. The lawyer asked Fred if he had read the document, and Fred acknowledged that he had. Fred was then asked if he was signing this contract of his own volition, and Fred said, yeah. All this was taking place on national TV with the lights and the camera squarely on Davis and Biletnikoff. It was great exposure for the Raiders. Meanwhile, the Lions contingency and Fred's mother were screaming from the sidelines for Fred not to sign. Then Mrs. Biletnikoff screamed at Al Davis, "You'll be sorry for this," to which Davis replied, "No, you'll be the sorry one." And although he wasn't an immediate starter, Fred Biletnikoff went on to a 14-year career with the Raiders that culminated into a trip to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The number 3 player drafted by the Raiders, tackle Bob Spias, became an instant starter. Number 4 pick, Missouri linebacker Gus Otto, also became a starter. Kent McLuhan, a speedy defensive back, was also added, in addition to Arizona State junior running back Larry Todd, who was signed as a parting shot to Arizona State head coach Frank Kush, who had helped the Baltimore Colts steal a player away from him in the 1964 draft. So with the infusion of good young players and the addition of a new national television package, which would rotationally feature the Raiders in a 4 o'clock game, Oakland was ready to get back to its winning ways. Oakland's main competition in the West was the San Diego Chargers, the team that had reached the league championship game in 4 of its first 5 years in league existence, and the team that Al Davis had first started with. After a resounding Week 1 home win against Kansas City, the Raiders basically alternated between wins and losses, hovering right at the 500 mark until the latter part of the season. Even on their 3-week East Coast road trip, which had always seemed to be a point of failure in the past, they split those 3 contests with a win against the Patriots, a loss to the Buffalo Bills, and a tie against the New York Jets in front of a Saturday night Shea Stadium crowd of nearly 55,000 people. With their record sitting at 5-4-1, the Raiders won 3 games in a row with back-to-back wins against the Broncos and a win over the Jets back in Oakland in the last game played at Ewell Field. They lost the last game of the season against the San Diego Chargers, the eventual Western Division champions. But the Raiders were in playoff contention right up until the next to last week of the season. With a final record of 8-5-1, with 3 of those losses coming by 7 points or less, the Raiders had returned to their winning ways and prepared to move into their new home at the Oakland Alameda Coliseum the following season. The 1965 season also saw 4 Raiders players receiving All-Star recognition: center Jim Otto, guard Wayne Haskins, defensive back Dave Grayson, and running back Clem Daniels. Daniels, the first premier running back for the Raiders organization, came to the team in 1961. He was originally drafted by the Dallas Texans at Prairie View A&M, a traditionally black school. Back then, players from those schools didn't get much of a look, so a lot of their players didn't see many professional opportunities come their way. The Texans first tried to convert Daniels to a defensive back, then they let him go. The Raiders picked him up, which was one of the few good things they did that year, since they only won 1 game. When Clemon first arrived, the Raiders put him through the mill, as they say, to see how tough he was and where he might best fit in. They started him off at fullback. They wanted to see if he had talent, how tough he was, and whether or not he could play. Clemon had both speed and size, and he showed that he had toughness. He was eventually moved from fullback to halfback. He split time at the running back spot during practices, but didn't make much of a contribution that first year with the Raiders. In his second season with the Raiders, 1962, he still didn't get much of a chance, and the Raiders had a disastrous season, changing head coaches midway through the year, with another coach who would end up also getting fired at the end of the season. When Al Davis was then brought in as head coach and general manager, the organization relied on Davis's strength as a recruiter and being able to recognize talent. When he saw what he had with Daniels, Al immediately made him the starting halfback. Clem was a big back with great speed and the ability to bounce it outside. He also had a terrific pair of hands, which made him an excellent receiver coming out of the backfield. But he was also good at being able to go deep, which fit perfectly into the Al Davis scheme of the vertical passing attack. At that time, the Raiders didn't really have a tight end who could get down the field, so the Raiders would often send Daniels on deep routes. Every week, it seemed, Al Davis was looking for new and different ways to get the ball into the hands of Clement Daniels. Daniels became the prototypical Raiders feature back, who could not only run well inside and bounce it outside, but he could also block well and be a dependable go-to receiver. Clement could do it all. He was chosen as the Raiders' Player of the Year in the big turnaround season of 1963, continued to improve in 1964, and finished out 1965 with all-league honors. Clem was well-liked by the Raiders organization and was also very popular and well-respected within the city of Oakland. One of the signature players on defense came in as a rookie in 1964 out of the University of Miami, Dan Connors, who played linebacker. He ended up playing through the 1974 season. Dan was actually a defensive lineman in college, but when the Raiders brought him in, they stood him up at the linebacker position. Dan was the first in a series of Raider linebackers who were converted in such a way. Years later, Monty Johnson and even Matt Millen would both follow in that tradition. Dan was one of the smartest linebackers in the history of the Raiders franchise. He was neither fast nor strong, but he was extremely quick. His biggest strength was his knowledge of what was going on around him and his ability to be in the right place at the right time. Dan always found a way to be around the ball, and he was always making plays. He may not go down in history as one of the greatest linebackers of all time, but he will go down in Raiders history as being one of the best defensive playmakers. Now, here are the words of head coach and general manager Al Davis as he addressed the television audience tuned in to the 1965 Oakland Raiders yearbook following the season. In Al's words, "Certainly the past 3 years have been memorable ones, and certainly there have been many fine chapters written in Oakland Raiders tradition. And we hope the years ahead will be the most memorable for our fans and for our organization. The growth of the American Football League has been a dynamic one, and the cities that represent the Eastern Division, such as the Boston Patriots with Babe Parilli and John Hewart, the New York Jets with the fabulous Joe Namath, and of course the Houston Oilers and their fine new organization, the champion Buffalo Bills with the very great Jack Kemp, and the latest addition, the Miami Dolphins, who will give the Eastern Division a great deal of excitement in 1966. And in our own Western Division, we have the Denver Broncos with Cookie Gilchrist, and the very talented Kansas City Chiefs with Bobby Bell, and the sensational Mike Garrett, the Heisman Trophy winner from the University of Southern California. And of course, the ever-powerful San Diego Chargers with the great Lance Allworth make us look forward to 1966 with great anxiety. And so in 1966, the great rivalries continue. The great new stars who came into the American Football League in 1965, like Joe Namath and Paul Costa, and the hardcore of veterans that represent our league, like Bobby Bell, Jack Kemp, and Lance Allworth, and the fine rookies who are coming out of the colleges in 1966 to represent the American Football League, make for a great and dynamic season in the new Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. I want you to know that this is your team, and I hope you'll grow with us as we grow. And I hope, too, that we'll see you at the new stadium in 1966. Even bigger things were now on the horizon for the Raiders, for the city of Oakland, for the American Football League, and for Al Davis, who would now change hats and lead the team through that critical period that transformed the team and shook up the entire landscape of professional football. Join me next time as we visit the year 1966, where things are going to start looking a whole lot different. Once again, I'd like to give credit to Ken Rappaport, Murray Olderman, Michael McCambridge, NFL Films, Steve Travers, the multi-part video documentary of the American Football League called Full Color Football, which I highly recommend, the city of Oakland, and Coach Tom Flores for his own remembrances of Dan Connors and Clement Daniels. This is T3 Raider Facts, thanking you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and go back and catch any of the previous episodes you may have missed and share it with a friend. When you search T3 Raider Roots Podcast, you can go under the special playlist on my YouTube channel, T3 Sports Guy, where you can find all the episodes of this podcast all in one place. Until next time, remember, passion always outlives fashion. And here's wishing you a bright silver moon shining in the dark black night.